He's not actually strong. He's not capable of wielding instruments of power. He's not actually even that good at being corrupt. Nobody is respectful of Trump as strong. That is entirely a myth that only works inside America in American English. And so that's why he has to be so concerned about elections, because he can't take too many more blows to that image. The war is one humiliation, and he's lost it in an absolutely humiliating fashion. Too many blows like that, and the image of power crumples, and it can crumple fast because it's only based on what other people see, right? It's like the end of The Wizard of Oz. Like, at a moment you realize, wait a minute, there actually isn't anything there.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Best People podcast. Before any of this really began in earnest, there was a quiet, steady, stern voice in my ear, informing, educating, and steeling me for what would transpire if our country took the plunge with a politician openly running for office on autocratic practices. Look out for those who would obey in advance. Be on the lookout for anyone who would suggest an all-or-nothing approach for citizens to beat back tyrannical leadership. That voice, of course, belongs to Tim Snyder, and some of those writings are from his essential work on tyranny and on democracy and the road to unfreedom. We have hungered for his wisdom and his voice here. So without any further introduction, this is The Best People, and this is Professor Timothy Snyder. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, very glad to be with you and to talk again.
You know, I remember when we were part of NBC and we hired Ronna McDaniel. She'd been a Trump advisor, and everyone had a real justified reaction at MSNBC and NBC, frankly, to bringing on someone who'd been part of January 6th lies that undergirded a deadly insurrection. And Rachel, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but Rachel sent me the first page of On Tyranny, and she said it's literally on the first page, this concept of obeying in advance and the dangers when companies do that. And it's just been this thing that I've logged in my brain and I've tried to track. And I have to say that Trump told us what he was going to do, but I am most disappointed and most despondent about all of the obeying in advance. And I wonder if it's what you expected or if it exceeds what you were prepared for.
Sigh. It's a tough question. I mean, at a practical level, I personally keep myself going by surrounding myself by people who wouldn't obey in advance and are not obeying in advance and who are doing lots of stuff. And I think it's important that every judgment we make about our fellow citizens be accompanied by some kind of action and be accompanied by some kind of engagement with our fellow citizens. I think the place where I'm most disappointed, and I have a feeling your judgment might be similar, would be with the people who have the greatest power, the people who have the greatest wealth. I was very disappointed with one party in our two-party system. There were, of course, courageous people in that party. Liz Cheney, for example. If there had been 25 Liz Cheneys in that party elected at the national level, we would not be where we are. But unfortunately, there were not 25 Liz Cheneys. And people with wealth, people who had really no reason to fear, the people who had the least reason to fear in our country, who chose, even before the election had happened, to make it clear that they were going to go along. The owner of the Washington Post, the owner of the LA Times, far too many of the tech folks in Silicon Valley made it clear that they would go along. It's not surprising exactly, but it's very disappointing. And then for the people in general, I think this is just a challenge. What do we mean by freedom and what do we mean by democracy? If we think that we Americans are automatically free, whatever we do, or this is a democracy no matter what happens in it, then what happens is that we just kind of rationalize and accept everything that happens and say, well, this must be freedom and this must be democracy because it's America. And then when we think that way, we ourselves are also obeying in advance.
I obviously try to do both, right? Try to surround myself in the people that are taking action, but also cover the things that are happening in the government. And what's interesting to me is that it's become, I said this to a reporter yesterday, the Trump story right now is so bleak that it's boring. Todd Blanche being confirmed is, to use your phrase, unsurprising, but deeply disappointing. I mean, he was confirmed by men that Trump humiliated publicly. And I called it strategic humiliation. I think they announced this vaccine policy as part of a strategic humiliation for Senator Cassidy, whose vote put Todd Blanche over the line on Friday. And then they did something that they know he opposes on Monday. In terms of understanding why so many people with power to do something different obey and capitulate. Have you seen anything new or different, or is this what happens the world over when an autocrat uses his bullying and extrajudicial tactics and threats?
Yeah. I mean, this is what a lot of smart historians, not only me, but people coming from different political trajectories who have worked on these kinds of regimes would all say, I think, some version of this. A lot of people are going to go along. And, whether it's Ann Applebaum has wrote some very good articles about this, and she has a background as a historian of these subjects. Ruth Ben-Ghiat as well, Jason Stanley. I mean, the people, whatever their politics are, if you've worked on authoritarian regimes, you know that part of the problem, a big part of the problem, is that a lot of folks will go along. And I think we in the United States make ourselves more vulnerable with our notion that we're different from everybody else. I think that's been one of our big problems. And that's why in On Tyranny, I try to use examples from other countries to then lead us back to ourselves. Because when we say we're America, we're special, we're exceptional, founding fathers, and so on, when we do all that, we make ourselves more rather than less vulnerable, because then we interpret everything that's happening as somehow being about a story which is going to turn out well in the end. And it isn't going to turn out well in the end unless we take hold of this story, because democracy and freedom have to be about feeling awkward, and they have to be about putting yourself out a little bit, and they have to be about feeling a little bit uncomfortable, because they're not the natural course of history. I mean, history doesn't have any natural course, but the general trend is always going to be the people with the wealth are going to consolidate the institutions around them and make things comfortable for themselves. That's generally how things work. And the only way to stop that is to have laws and believe in them and to enforce them and to redistribute wealth, but also distribute opportunity so that people believe that their children are going to have a chance at a different and a better and a more interesting life, that there can be a future in general. So, yeah, I mean, that's how I see that.
We try to spend a lot of time on the rule of law. And I wonder if you view this confirmation of Donald Trump's former personal criminal defense attorney as an accelerant, or if you view it as part of the continuum of what he's been doing since he got there and directed DOJ to purge prosecutors, directed the FBI to purge investigators who touched the cases involving him. Todd Blanche seems uniquely dangerous in this job.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is one more occasion for us to take a step back if we happen to be in the media or be public commentators and think and speak conceptually about all this. It's an element of regime change, or it's a consolidation of regime change. The Department of Justice is supposed to serve, as you say, the rule of law. It's supposed to serve the American people. And it has been changed into an instrument to serve the personal interest of one American citizen. That is a regime change. That's a qualitative shift in what the institution is supposed to do. And in fact, what it is doing, right? So I would take this confirmation and going back to your previous point, it's kind of sickening that we would keep confirming people like this. From the very beginning, we've had just this outrageous list, and somehow we can never get to a majority not to let these people through. And it takes such a tiny, infinitesimal amount of courage to stop something, which I think a lot of people know in their hearts, big or small hearts, that this is the wrong thing for the country. But yeah, I see this as regime change, where you're moving away from the rule of law and you're moving towards everyone knowing that law is kind of a joke, because law is just there to serve a single person. And I mean, while we're on the subject, Mr. Blanche himself should be personally ashamed, and he should not have put himself forward for this. It stands against the things he learns in law school. It stands against the things he learned as a clerk.
I love working for President Trump. It's the greatest honor of a lifetime. And if President Trump chooses to keep me as acting, that's an honor. If he chooses to nominate me, that's an honor. If he chooses to nominate somebody else and I go back to being the DAG, that's an honor. If he chooses to nominate somebody else and asks me to go do something else, I will say, thank you very much. I love you, sir.
It stands against every norm that he was taught his entire career to treat the president of the United States as if he were someone who hires you so that he can abuse the law with his behavior. There are professional ethics. There is such a thing. So it's not only that people shouldn't be confirmed, you should be ashamed of yourself if you're putting yourself forward for this, especially at this particular historical moment when it's all so clear.
What I found interesting too, and this is for me the challenge of covering the party I was once a part of, pushing the country towards something anti-democratic and clearly autocratic. They used to care about the rule of law. It's clear they don't. They used to care about threats of violence for judges. They used to care about threats of violence against judges that were extremely conservative. We've passed all of those exits, right? The rebukes and the warnings that this rhetoric is going to lead to someone getting hurt, we're beyond that. Judge Esther Salas's son was killed, and she speaks out all the time. Judge Boasberg was appointed by there are plenty of judges appointed by presidents of both parties who are all saying the same thing. And to that, Todd Blanche refuses to turn down the heat. What is that combination of lawlessness and enthusiasm for violence mean?
Yeah, first of all, it reminds us of something very important, which is that law is embodied in human beings, and all of us in a rule of law state have the right not to be threatened and not to be harmed bodily, and that's a truth that starts well before we get to judges, who of course are a special case. I'm just making the point that when we allow violence of other kinds to become normal, including the violence of deporting immigrants and putting them in concentration camps and so on, that too is a pathway which leads to the normalization of violence against everyone. And of course, judges as a certain kind of elite are towards the end of the process, not towards the beginning of it. The second thing, which is really striking about it, is that they don't really know where they're going with this. I think there's a kind of naivete around their cynicism where they think, well, we can break this, we can intimidate judges, we can operate without the rule of law. But what next then? Where does it then stop? And what's their program? And how is it going to look? I don't think they really have any idea. I mean, it may seem like an odd example, but I think it's a little bit like the war in Iran, where they think like, hey, we can just break the rules and do some stuff, and it will all sort itself out in a way that we like. I don't think that's true in domestic politics either. I think if you break all the rules, things will not sort themselves out the way that you want. I mean, they will be terrible for the country, but I don't think that breaking all these rules and rubbing out all these lines and erasing all these norms is going to lead them to the place they think they want to be. In other words, I don't think for a Todd Blanche or for Donald Trump or whatever, I don't think there's a predictable outcome 2 or 3 years down the line for them.
What do you think is coming down the line for them? I mean, do you see everybody? I mean, they've got about a 32 to 34% approval rating. So that's sort of the hardened Trump. He's had those people as he botched COVID. He's had those people as he careened in and out of January 6th. That is his sort of cohort. But what do you think is coming for all the people that are a part of this in 2 or 3 years?
I mean, I want to pause a little bit on that 30% or so. We have to recognize that 30% are the people who like this. Like, it's not just that they're uninformed or whatever. There are people who don't want the United States to be a democracy. There are people who want us to be a country where the purpose of government is for some people to hurt other people. And if once you internalize that, you realize that when you win an election, it's not it's not final proof that everyone is okay. What it means is that you have to use the power that you now have to make the country more just and more functional. Because if your idea when you win is that this proves that everything is a-okay, you're not going to do some of the hard things, and you're not going to do some of the hard thinking that's necessary to actually make things more like okay. And that 30% isn't going to go away. So when you've got a majority, you then have to use it. As far as what's waiting for them, I think that's a great question, because it does depend on us, and it depends on whether we actually believe in the rule of law. One thing which worries me about this campaign season is that I just think the Democrats should be talking, or candidates should be talking much more about not just the rule of law in principle, but the prosecution of people in practice. That if you choose to break the law to try to change the outcome of this coming election, we will prosecute you when we can. And when we have a majority, we will try to find ways to investigate people around the president who are obviously corrupt and who have obviously benefited from the war or from personal contacts with the president. I think so. Like, their fate partly depends on whether Democrats as the opposition party and us and we in general are willing to talk about the rule of law. Because if the rule of law doesn't apply to powerful people who are making huge amounts of money in criminal ways, then it doesn't really apply to anybody else either. Like, those in some way are the hard cases, but in some way they're also the easy cases, because those are the cases that people are generally very angry about. So if you don't let that, like if you let the people around the president go, then you're also letting the rule of law go. Right. So I guess what I'm saying is it depends on us. Like, the rule of law it's not a metronome, which is just going to come back. Right. We're going to have to push it back.
Yeah, I mean, and I've interviewed Jack Smith and Brian Driscoll this summer, and they say a version of something like that you're going to have to, it's not self-actuating. Like, you're going to have to put it back together with people who believe in it.
There are legions of career prosecutors, people just like me, you just don't know their name, who want to do the right thing. They're in the Justice Department. They want to serve. We have a lot of challenges in front of us, and the rehabilitation of the department is not going to be any mean feat. Recovering character is a lot harder than gaining it in the first place. But I think we're totally capable of doing that. I'm completely optimistic.
They're going to have to be incredibly strong and principled and transparent, because there's no, sort of switch that's going to flip. Like, oh, we elected a Democrat, everything's going to go back to normal. It's been too long of an erosion. And I wonder, it seems like people should start preparing themselves for how tumultuous that will be as well.
Yeah. And I mean, there are different kinds of preparation. I mean, one is to say, you know what? It's normal for people to be prosecuted when they commit crimes,
Right.
Like, that's actually a normal thing. And it starts from the top and not from the bottom. The Constitution defines the office of the president as executing the laws. That's literally his only job, is to carry out the laws. And so if he violates the laws, he's the single person who should most be should most draw the attention, right, of those of us who care about the rule of law, because he doesn't have any other job except to implement it, actually. But in general, the president can be hard because of the completely moronic Supreme Court ruling, but the people around the president are less hard, right? So, but part of it is to just know this is normal. Like, in other countries, this happens. I mean, in Italy, France, I mean, major democracies, heads of government and state have been prosecuted and have been found guilty of breaking the law and have faced consequences. And that is actually normal. It's what's dictatorial is the idea that there's somebody and he and his friends, or like everybody who he touches personally, with his fingers on their forehead or whatever, are somehow beyond the law. That's dictatorial. As soon as you make that exception, as soon as you think, oh, well, those people, that particular set of people wearing that particular color of tie, those people are immune, then you're already in a dictatorial zone. So, yeah, so it's normal. That's one thing. And the other thing is, there has to be a way to translate the anger of Americans. I mean, I think it should be translated into policy, into redistribution, into healthcare, and so on, into schools, into hospitals. But that anger can also be translated into the rule of law. And by the way, it's important, because if you don't translate anger about injustice into law, it's going to go in some other direction. And it's going to be a direction that everybody likes less, including Democrats for that matter, right? If people are very, very angry because they think things are corrupt, and you can't show them that there's a legal way to deal with this problem, then people are going to learn a lesson that you don't want them to learn. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, yeah, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to prosecute people, but it's going to be harder not to.
No, but what I was going to ask is, it seems like that will, a lot of people speak nostalgically about the post-Watergate reforms that Trump has just blown through. I think he did it in about the first 9 months. It feels like on the other side of this, the reforms will have to be radical transparency, almost like things happening in full view of the citizenry. So there's been such an erosion in first of all, who believes who, but second, Trump has done such a meticulous, I don't know if that's the right word, but he seems to put a lot of effort into making his supporters and even some swing voters not believe their eyes and not believe their ears. I wonder if you view sort of the structural reforms to our government and the rule of law as happening alongside to sort of a whole of society effort to make the truth great again and make the truth again.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, in my freedom book, that was one of the main places where I dwelled. You can't really have freedom without truth. You can't have freedom without belief in truth. Because if none of us believes that anything is true, then there's no way we can organize or act together. If I don't believe anything is true, then how do I know about your suffering, right? Like if I don't believe anything is true, how do I know about the elemental political facts, the corruption in the school board or the water pollution? Like if nothing is true, we can't act, but we also don't have any basis to act. And as we've seen with Trump, then we're vulnerable to the best liars. So if you choose to believe there's no truth, you're basically saying, okay, it's time for affirmative action for liars, because the best liars are going to be the ones who profit from this situation. And yeah, and truth doesn't come on its own, right? Like it's like democracy. It doesn't come on its own. There's this notion of a marketplace of ideas and the best ideas come out. That's totally wrong, right? We've seen how that's wrong. The marketplace of ideas can be monopolized and people can dominate it from the perspective of their platforms. And the good ideas don't come to the top. There are billions of good ideas out there which are not anywhere near the top. And there are lots of terrible ideas which are near the top, right? Like the idea we should have a war against Iran, or the idea that we shouldn't tax rich people. Very bad idea, but somehow it made its way to the top. So you have to work from the ground up, and you have to do things like let's subsidize journalism that involves reporting. Let's take some of the profits from social media, treat social media basically is intellectual pollution. Let's internalize some of that externality. Let's tax them a tiny bit and use that to fund journalism. We have to have a way to make local journalism work. If we don't have local journalism, we don't have local truth, and then if you don't have local truth, you can't have national democracy. But so yeah, social media itself does not have to be the total morass that it is. If you go to other countries, I mean, even Canada I shouldn't say even Canada, that will annoy the Canadians, but like even Canada has much better social media than we do.
Yeah.
And the Europeans have far better social media than we do, right? You can in fact have rules. Like we have chosen to walk into the middle of the swamp and put our heads in it. That was a choice. We created a regulatory environment which favors that. You can have another regulatory environment in which it will be less bad, right? But it kind of all begins from the word that you used, which is truth. I mean, people in the public sphere, like you and me and others, I think have to use the word, because if you don't use the word, then the concept loses its prestige, and we find ourselves in this kind of clammy, uncomfortable environment where the only thing people are comfortable in talking about is like what he said and what she said, right? And that gets to too much of like, that is a problem with, for example, an institution which I value and from which I learn every day, which is the New York Times. Like there's just too much of they said that and the other people said this, right? But maybe both of them are lying, like, and if you don't take a deep breath and believe in truth, it's so easy to fall back on the paradigm of, well, maybe they said this and maybe they said that, and I'm just going to report both sides and then everything's somehow going to be okay. And that way of seeing things, like imagining that the truth is somehow in between two liars, which it isn't, has demoralized us, right? So yeah, I think
Totally.
we have to start with this, like, I mean, it's conservative value in the nice sense, like that there are things that are true.
Hmm. Hmm. What I think is interesting too is that it hasn't infected the judiciary largely, the federal judges who are looking at the Trump cases, who say like it is
Mm.
absolute nonsense that whatever they tried to do to deport people to the terrorist prison, CCOT, that it is the alien enemy, the ludicrous things that you're trying to use do not have any predicate in fact. The settlement with the IRS, the court said this, you can't be both the fraudster and the government you're trying to defraud. The judges have not tolerated this post-fact, post-truth norm. I mean, it's so unique just to our politics, and as you're saying, the media that cover our politics. And I wonder, it makes me want to. I'm from California, where you spend a lot of time thinking about wildfires. Like you almost want to wall it off and make sure it seems to be infecting health policy now. It infects, as you said, how we regulate social media. We don't even seem to want to protect young girls from incredibly toxic, dangerous content, or young boys from, the unwillingness of the citizenry feels uniquely American to wall things off from the infection of lies. And I wonder if you agree with that, and I wonder if you have any ideas on how to build more will to at least sort of decontaminate our empirical facts and truth from the lies in our politics.
Yeah, great question. I want to just step back to the judges for a second, because the in order to have a judge, you have to have a certain kind of education. You have to have, law school in most cases. You have to have a set of norms, and then you have to have a sense of protection. Going back to your Blanche question. So judges do all these things because they've been educated and trained to believe that you apply the facts to the law. And then they get to this point in their careers and they're capable of still doing it. And you're right, it's noteworthy and it's to be praised. I just wanted to connect that to another tradition, which is the tradition of tenure at universities, which is meant to serve the same purpose. So professors, they don't do it now except for lunch, at Oxford or whatever, but professors used to wear robes. And it was actually for the same reason. I know this is going to sound very stilted and old-fashioned, that judges wear robes. The idea was that tenure gave you the protection so that you could speak the truth about your expertise, just as a judge can. Right. So just as a judge learns the law and applies it, an anthropologist or a political scientist or a historian or whatever, they learn their fields. And from the security of a university chair and tenure, they will de facto, not just de jure, but de facto have free speech and be able to pronounce on issues like the ones you were mentioning, right? Like global warming or like hygiene and healthcare. I mean, the idea is that you get freedom of speech by building institutions. And the judiciary is one, and the universities are another. And it's no coincidence that universities are under attack, because whatever their flaws are, and of course they are many, and I could speak happily to all of them, universities are nevertheless a place where people speak more freely than they do in the rest of American society. And the institutions that allow that are being deliberately attacked. And the lesson from all this is that if you want to have freedom of speech, you have to build institutions that support the weakest and the least powerful and allow them to speak, as opposed to allowing the wealthy and the powerful to use the term free speech to make life much harder for everybody else.
Are you surprised then that universities did deals with Trump, seemingly predicated on very little evidence of the things he accused them of?
I think it was a mistake. I mean, they're not as powerful as other institutions, and they're maybe less agile than law firms, some of whom also capitulated. But I think it was and remains a mistake. And if you stick to your guns and you file countersuits, you're probably going to win. But you're certainly going to win in the judgment of history. And I mean, history for universities is open. The universities have been around for a long time, let's say 1,000 years. They've gone up, they've gone down. The last 100 years in the US have been pretty good. If we make bad decisions now, universities could be sidelined for the next 100.
We didn't directly tackle what I really worry people are growing numb to, and that's the treatment of asylum seekers and migrants and immigrants in this country, the stripping of status for people who've been living and working in our communities for years. It feels like what happened in Minneapolis was a turning point for the country, for democracy, for people seeing that they could do something. But it also feels like, as remarkable as that was, there's been an equally remarkable sort of inability to sustain that focus. And I wonder how you see this bucket of abuses from Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be able to, it's a love thy neighbor as thyself. Like, if you can't start from the person who's slightly weaker than you are, then you're not going to be able to work for democracy. And I'm really struck by how the people who are doing the more obvious democracy work are also the same people who get involved in helping immigrants who are in peril. So broadly speaking, the way I see it is this: if you want to set up an authoritarian regime, you define a target group and you punish them in public so that people get used to, I'm sorry to say it, but the pleasure of watching other people hurt. And if you're going to respond to that, you can't just ignore it. You have to respond to it actively. You have to name it for what it is. You have to try to help. You have to name it as a wrong. And if you do that, then you find yourself actually more empowered to do other things in the democracy space.
Where do you see the public's response to the war in Iran, where it does not support the war? Trump's own base does not support the war in Iran. And there are also very little public displays of that opposition, which is seemingly sincere and heartfelt and deeply felt.
That's a really good question. I mean, my own view of the politics of this war is a little bit different than maybe others. I think that, we've lost it and it's unwinnable. And Trump, of course, can't even save face. But I also think he's secretly hoping that the war is going to give him something that'll help him in the elections. A real terrorist attack, a fake terrorist attack, something. Because they're going to lose really big unless there's something. So I think that's his kind of secret hope. I think for Americans understandably see the war in Iran as an example of corruption more than anything else, which it obviously is. It's a result of a very small number of people making decisions, and our negotiators are people who are making money in the region. It's sad to say, but I think Americans will protest when in a war where more Americans are at risk. American service people, members have, of course, died, but this is basically a standoff war where Trump is hoping vainly that more missiles will somehow do a thing that they can't possibly do. I think the connection that has to be made and has to be pushed is, if you don't want stupid wars, then don't have corrupt billionaires with fantasies in power. Because corrupt billionaires have fantasies, and one of their fantasies is usually, even if not at the beginning, by the end, it's going to be about some war. And that's a scenario that we have. If you don't want to have these dumb wars, you have to have a more democratic society, and you have to have the billionaires and their fantasies out of the picture.
Let me ask you to say a little bit more about what he will try to do to stave off embarrassment. I mean, he clearly doesn't care about Republicans losing their seats in Congress or in the Senate, but he is obsessed with not being embarrassed by political defeat, obsessively talking about Herbert Hoover and the economy. What do you think people should be prepared for ahead of the midterms, and what can people do? This is one area where people tend to feel helpless.
Yeah. I mean, we recognize that you, despite impediments, you can still win big, which happens. It's happened in the United States in the era of civil rights. It's happened recently in Hungary and Poland. You can win elections even when you're going uphill. It can happen, and so you have to work to make it happen, which means everybody votes, everybody organizes, everybody accepts that this is a coalition in which there are going to be people to your right and to your left or above you, below you, whatever, who you don't entirely agree with, but who are on your side about the basic issue of democracy and renewal. So this election has to be won. It has to be won big, but not just for the Democrats or by the Democrats, but by people who pull the Democrats along towards a vision that we are going to make this place less corrupt. We're going to make it less unequal. We're going to do radical things so that people's anger can be transformed into hope. And so as far as what candidates can do, I think, to be radical is to be pragmatic. If you want to be pragmatic, you have to be radical. And when you win, you have to show that you have specific steps about corruption and inequality that you're willing to take. Maybe Trump will veto them, right? And then the Republicans lose in 28. But you have to give people something right away after you win.
Well, I mean, I think part of what Trump's messaging is to make people despair, right? Like he doesn't ever push any laws that help people's lives, but he obsessively pushes the SAVE Act. He obsessively threatens lawsuits. How do people sort of find courage to do this very basic thing, to go out and vote with confidence, one, that they'll be safe, and two, that their vote will be counted?
Well, the vast majority of us will be safe, but we can't do without that little bit of courage, right? It does take a little bit of courage, and being courageous means that you're on the right side. So you have to recognize that if you're going to be on the right side, then you're going to have to show a little bit of courage. For many of us in secure positions, people like me, it's just a little tiny bit, but we can't do without it. And speaking of courage, that reminds me of what I want to say about Trump. One thing to be prepared for is his rapid collapse, because his entire political persona, depends on the idea that he's strong, which he isn't. I mean, not in any meaningful sense. He's not strong. He lives entirely by the strength that is conferred upon him by people who believe the story that he's strong, right? He's not actually strong. He's not capable of wielding instruments of power. He's not actually even that good at being corrupt. I mean, a truly competent, corrupt person would make much more money out of being president of the United States than he's made. He's not strong in any way. There's no one beyond the United States, let me put it this way, who believes that he's strong in any country. I mean, people have to be respectful of the power of the United States, but nobody is respectful of Trump as strong. That is entirely a myth that only works inside America, in American English. And so that's why he has to be so concerned about elections, because he can't take too many more blows to that image. The war is one humiliation. It's the dumbest war in human history, as far as I know, and he's lost it in an absolutely humiliating fashion. Too many blows like that, and the image of power crumples, and it can crumple fast because it's only based on what other people see, right? It's like the end of The Wizard of Oz. Like, at a moment you realize, wait a minute, there actually isn't anything there. So on the good side, one thing we prepared for is that enough people turn the corner and they realize, wow, it's just a balloon. There's just air inside. That's it.
I'm going to go away with this image of that final scene of The Wizard of Oz. There's one thing that you said that I quote to any family dealing within a family about questions about either pro-Trump and anti-Trump, or more commonly, how much to oppose Trump. And you made this point early in his second term, I think probably before that everyone doesn't have to do everything. Everyone just has to do something. Will you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you. That's such an important issue, because we talk, and we raise these important issues, but even as we raise them, we can give people the impression that it's all got to be solved by you, the listener, you, the citizen. And that's just not true. What you said about Trump trying to demoralize people, that's very right. He only wins if everybody thinks they can do nothing, right? If everybody, or even most people, think that they can do a little bit, it's game over for Trump. So if we can just on our own patch, like wherever we feel strong, wherever we feel knowledgeable, if we act there, many of us, it's going to be okay. It's not on us to solve everything. It's just on us to make sure we're doing something. And if each of us does something in a way where we recognize others and join with others, then really you can succeed.
Tim Snyder, thank you so much for your time today.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks so much.